Yeah, my name is Ed Finkler. This is Stronger Than Fear Mental Health in the Developer Community. That is Open Source Bridge 2015. Put a little hashtag. I don't care. Use a hashtag. Whatever. That's fine. Anyway, who am I? Again, my name is Ed Finkler. I'm a dad. I'm a husband and developer type. Been that way for a long time, about 20 years. Sometimes I'm a musician, kind of big nerd dude. I also have mental illness or mental disorder, whatever nomenclature you like to use, or actually got a couple of them. Now I'm just a person. I'm not of any learned degrees in these fields. I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any kind of certification in that kind of way. I am certified in mental health first aid, but I don't have any other extensive training in it. But I am here to talk about what it's like to have mental disorder from my perspective, and also talk about kind of generally how that impacts our community, the general impact of it that it has in the workplace and things like that. So I'm going to do a real informal survey here. And if you've ever seen me do this last year, this will probably be old hat to you. But if not, then it's new to you. So if you have seen me do it before, pretend you haven't. How many of you need glasses or contacts? Almost everybody. Okay, great. How many of you are afraid to tell people about it? Okay, nobody yet. Good. Usually some smart ass who raises their hand more. Have you ever had people say to you, "You're not trying hard enough," when you need glasses? Like, maybe instead of the glasses, maybe you could just squint. Has anyone ever done that to you? Okay, no. All right, good. So people don't do that. Pretty common thing that you have to have some sort of assistive device, let's talk. Whether it's a lens that hangs out here or stuck on your eyeball. I don't know why I would do that. That seems really creepy to me. But how about diabetes? Now, I have a father and a brother who both have type 2 diabetes, which pretty much means I'm screwed. But have you ever, let's see, I'm wondering if you would be comfortable talking about somebody, or talking with somebody, let's say somebody you work with, about topic of diabetes, whether you have it or whether, I heard Sam has it, or, she has that, or something. Would you feel comfortable about it? I want you to raise your hand if you'd say, yeah, I feel comfortable talking about that issue. Most people, yeah, some of you didn't, you're supposed to raise your hands, you're not supposed to look at me and nod. That's not getting off to a great start. Most people are comfortable with it. Yeah, right. Now, how about cancer? Something that, in fact, a few decades ago, people did not like to talk about it. I know most of that from Mad Men, but people told me. I have a brother who has cancer. He's very sick right now. But it's fairly common to discuss it. I'm just curious, again, raise your hands if you would. Would you feel comfortable discussing cancer with somebody, say you work with? Right? Somebody who you find at least semi-human that you can have an interaction with, that kind of thing. So, pretty comfortable with that. Okay, so there's a number of things. Cancer is a pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. Now, you don't have to say if you have one, but I'm curious about how many of you would feel comfortable talking to your boss or a coworker about a mental health issue. So let's call that 15% and kind of a little fishy on that, right? How about, I talked about a colleague. How about a family or a friend or family member? Let's assume that you actually get along with your family. So how about somebody you're close with? You feel pretty comfortable with it. Okay, well, there's a bunch of weirdos in Portland, I guess. But normally the percentage is lower. But yeah, okay. So I think that's interesting. I want you to think about that in the context of what we discussed. Now, I'm going to talk about myself because I am strangely open about these things. I have some diagnoses that I think are fairly accurate. I haven't dealt with them for quite a long time. I've been diagnosed with a thing called generalized anxiety disorder. I guess this would be different than just normal anxiety in that it is typically more extreme and happens for not an obvious reason. I have physical manifestations of that. I get I'll get sick to my stomach. I get a lot of tension. It feels like I have a knot under the sternum in my chest. I used to have irritable bowel syndrome, and I think it was very tied to that, so I would poop a lot. Not super fun. And I would get, I'm often really scared to go to new places. I'm scared to do things where I don't feel like I understand the rules, or I don't understand the criteria that I'm supposed to follow. So I am terrified to do things like get on the bus. I don't like doing that because I'm afraid I'm going to do the wrong thing. Not really a typical reaction you should have. It's actually not that big a deal, but I do have those reactions, I guess, at inappropriate times. Now, I also have something called adult ADHD, things that kind of manifest with that, but things that you might expect that we all kind of think of. So there's actually a couple different varieties of ADHD, but I have a lot of trouble focusing sometimes. I take medication to help with that, but I tend to do a lot of avoidance of things that I don't want to do, like severe avoidance. I also get frustrated really easily. I have kind of a low frustration threshold, and my emotions can be really intense, and that's something that you see with a certain kind of ADHD. And I think this actually kind of works with the anxiety disorder too, but I'm really, really good at constructing bad outcomes to things and then hyper-focusing on them. And so that's something I'm really awesome at. And so an example would be like, hey, you know, I get a letter from, say, my manager or something. It's like an email. He says, hey, I want to talk with you on Monday when you get in. And I think that I'm gonna lose my job. We're gonna lose our house. We're gonna be out everything. Everything's gonna be screwed. Everybody's gonna leave. I'm gonna be alone and live in a box. And that's what's gonna happen. And then that is what I'm focused on. That's what I think I have. It is almost never that. I have not. Most of the time, I ended up living in a box. But but I'm really good at constructing those outcomes. So yeah. Now I take some medication. I think I mentioned that. I take 4 major medications. 4 main things that I take to treat these things that I deal with. I take Lexapro, which is an SSRI. It's the same family of stuff as Prozac, and Lexapro is just sort of a more recent variant of it. And most of those SSRIs are just trying to get rid of side effects from it, but it still works pretty well, or effectively. I also take Buspar, which is an anti-anxiety medication. There's also seems to be some kind of, they think that it helps SSRIs be more effective. Whenever you read about like how these medications work, there's a lot of "we think" in it, which is interesting. I also take a thing called Strattera. Strattera is a very, very expensive medication because it's not generic. I was on a high deductible plan for a while, and I was paying $300 for 30 a month. Yeah, there's no generic for it. I think I saw the actual list price non-discounted is $500. I was only paying $300, so I was getting a good deal. But at least I could pay for it. And Strattera is an ADHD medication, and is the only one on the market in the U.S. that I know of, and I'm pretty sure that is not an amphetamine. Everything else to treat ADD or ADHD is an amphetamine. Strangely enough, my psychiatrist said that a person with anxiety disorder should not take speed. So actually kind of not a great idea. And then Klonopin is a tranquilizer. It is similar to Xanax or things like that. Cycles work a little differently and stuff like that, but it calms me down. I take that as I need to. Those are the 4 things I'm saying. And then I also see a therapist every 2 weeks. And I talk about why I do the things that I do, and I try to come up with strategies to address those things. So I'm doing both those things. I'm taking medication, and I believe that I have this chronic issue, and medication is really important for me to be able to get those things under control. At the same time, therapy is really helpful for me too. And so if you ever talk to me, people come to me and say, hey, what should I do? Like, I know what you should do. I don't. But I usually say, well, talk to these, but try to explore these different things. And I think that it is important to do those things. I think it's common that people will often say, oh, well, I'll just go to my, say, general practitioner, and I will get a prescription, and that will kind of help things. And kind of general practitioners aren't really trained in psychological issues, and so they don't they're probably not. You should see a specialist really and to figure out your plan of attack on this stuff. Hey, my Fitbit started vibrating. Hi. Okay, I'm going to slide over here. All right, yeah. You want to see? Yeah, okay. But all right. So now I'm still going to have to reach across here and do that. Anyway, but one of the things that I think is really the hardest about this is this feeling that I've had, and I had it for a long time since I was a kid, and really only recently I felt like I wasn't this way, was that you feel distinctly alone and like nobody else is like you because we generally don't talk about these kinds of things. And only recently, like in the last 10 years or so, did I start appreciating that actually it's really common to have these kinds of issues. And lots of people do, and we just don't talk about it. But I felt for a long time, a good 20 years of my life, that was the case. And junior high, high school, college, first 10 years of out of college, I really felt that way. And in that experience, I felt like I was broken. There was something wrong with me, and I was never going to be right. I was never going to figure out how to work in society and be productive and things like that. And that loneliness, that feeling of isolation, even in a crowd full of people, not knowing how to relate to them is just really crushing. And it was so difficult and so challenging for me. And for so many other people who have it worse than I do. And I think that it is the case that I'm not the only one, though that's what I found out, is I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people who deal with this stuff. So to talk a little bit about sort of the prevalence and how this affects us really as a society, and I'm going to throw some statistics at you that sound fancy, but I just looked them up. It wasn't like I figured it out. 1 in 5 adults have a mental... Across the board, I've looked at a few different things, but it's pretty consistent. About 20% of people in the U.S., adults in the U.S., in any one year have some mental disorder that they're dealing with. Now, obviously, that can vary a lot. Anxiety disorders are the most common. People will deal with depression. Some people deal with eating disorders. Some people deal with... things like schizophrenia, those kind of high-level psychological disorders, and substance abuse will fall under that as well. So that anxiety disorder is the most common, but you're talking about 20% of the population. That's a really, really high number. That's a high level of prevalence. And we're talking about level of disability, and some of this stuff I got from this report in 2004 from the World Health Organization, which was the last like really big global examination of prevalence of disease in general. And they did a comparison of sort of like the level of disability that you experience with different kinds of mental disorders and compared that to physiological disorders. And so they compared the level of disability of moderate depression. It would be similar to multiple sclerosis or severe asthma, both of which we think that's pretty debilitating. As severe depression, they compared that to quadriplegia and the level of disability that you have. The way that, and if you think about, if you're familiar with depression and severe depression, the way that they have a thing called motor retardation, which is why you feel like you don't want to move and you can't get out of bed and stuff like that. It's because your body is actually going through a thing where it's telling it, it's doing stuff that's making you feel that way. And that falls into this thing called disease burden, or there's apart from the global burden of disease that World Health Organization study. And the disease burden metric is something that I had where they basically took premature death plus years lived with a disability. And the idea is to kind of try to measure the burden, the impact that a disease has on a society and has on different groups. And they measured a bunch of different groups globally. And the burden of mental disorders was the largest of all disorder categories in North America. I mean, this is a 2004 study. It's more than cardiovascular disease. It was more than cancer. Now, the mortality rate is quite a bit lower, like significantly lower. But the years lived with disability and the impact that it has on people's ability to be relatively normal, productive members of society, however you just choose to define that, or how it interferes with their ability to do that, is very, very high. This is a quote from that study. It says, in all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults aged 15 years and over. That's in the entire world. They measured that. Across the board, that was that high, which is a crazy number. Crazy number. More numbers, talking about economic costs, and if you really want to look it up, you can look this link at the bottom, but Just trust me. So mental health conditions are the second leading cause of workplace absenteeism. And this is in the United States only. Workers with depression lose about 5.6 hours a week to that disorder, to that disease that they have, to that illness. And workers without depression lose about 1.5 hours a week. You can see it has a significant impact on their time available to work. And then depression, if you're just measuring numbers, that in absenteeism, I don't know, this stuff's going to be a little fuzzy, but let's throw out a big number, 43.7 billion absenteeism from work. So basically you're talking about days that you lose because of and they're just looking at depression in this case. They're not talking about the impact of anxiety disorders, they're not talking about this or that, this is just dealing with depression. So just one of the common mental disorders that people have. And there's an enormous amount of lost time because of that lost productivity and time spent on treatment. Now, I did a survey last year called Mental Health and Tech Survey, which, and the stats that I have here are only people in the U.S., and only non-self-employed folks, so people who have an employer. And because the way I asked the questions, it got a little fuzzy, and it's harder to make conclusions based on outside the U.S. because I was kind of biased toward people in the U.S. and the kind of questions that I asked. And also self-employed is a whole other thing because in the U.S. your workplace is really your primary conduit for healthcare, and for most people, and things are different for if you're self-employed and you have to figure out different stuff. Still very relevant, it's just these results, I'm only looking at those folks. So that was about, 800 people I think I had who fit that category who responded. So the first question would be, do you feel that your employer takes, or this is just one of a few questions that I'll go through, and there were more to it, but these are ones that I think were interesting. Do you feel that your employer takes mental health as seriously as physical health? That was a question we asked. And we had yes was 49%, which was, that's okay. But half of people said either they don't know, which don't know kind of would make me think no, or just said flat out no, that they don't believe they take it as seriously. Another question, do you think that discussing a health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? Like we compared physical and mental health. We asked the same question about physical health condition, mental health condition. So physical health condition, people were pretty decidedly said no, over 3/4. Maybe it was 20%, I guess you could figure out. It's like, hey, I broke my hand. That's a bummer, can't work. And then yes was only 4%. So if we look at mental health, no was only 36%, maybe 41%. Yes, decidedly there would be negative consequences is almost 1/4. That they're certain there's going to be consequences. And if you look at it, you're talking about almost 2/3 were maybe or yes. So only 1/3 of people were convinced that there wasn't going to be a negative consequence. I think that's quite a stark difference. And the second thing, would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? I get asked this question a lot. How do I deal with this in interviews? I'm trying to evaluate essentially whether this employer is going to be a jerk about stuff or not, or they're going to take me seriously. So would you bring up this health issue? Physical? No, 44%. Not kind of not surprising, especially depends on the physical issue, but maybe 44%. Yes, it's 12%. So there's some, I can understand where you might not want to bring that up. It is illegal to be prejudiced against somebody, to deny someone employment unless it would actually make them unable to do the job. It is illegal under the Americans with Disabilities Act to deny them employment on that basis, but proving that is extremely hard. Mental health, twice as many people said no. Only, I have to read that, 2% said yes. Only 2% said yes. I think that is very clearly shows the stigma that you're dealing with. A couple of things we'll go through here quickly. Do you know the options for mental health care your employer provides? Yes, 40%, okay. But still, you're talking about 3/5 of people, I would say not sure, kind of sounds like no. Or no. 3/5 of people did not know what mental health care options their employer provides. Does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? 26% said yes, so about 1/4. Almost everybody else said don't know or no, absolutely not. They don't provide us any resources about that. But think about that in the context of what we looked at in terms of the prevalence. It's extremely high and has a very high impact on worker productivity. So, let alone just being a nice person to people and wanting them to be happy and healthy, there's almost no information provided for that. Is your anonymity protected if you choose to take advantage of mental health or substance abuse treatment resources? Yes, it's 3%. That's good. Almost nobody knows. Over 2/3 have no idea. Don't know if their anonymity would be protected. How easy is it for you to take medical leave for mental health conditions? It's a question I get asked a lot, too, about how to deal with that. Over half people don't know. They just don't know. They don't know if it's okay or not. Very easy, 13%. Probably if that's come up, they know it's okay. They know it's okay with their boss. They know their organization, that's in their values. Somewhat easy, 18%. Somewhat difficult, very difficult. There's a couple there, but you're talking about 2/3, let's say, who don't know or believe it will be very difficult to do that. Would be able to take time off. So what I've seen anecdotally is people just lie about it. They say, I'm going to the doctor. They don't say, I'm going to the psychiatrist or my therapist. Or they say, I don't feel well. Well, it doesn't mean that they have the cold or flu or something like that. They just don't tell people what's going on. At the end of the day, sick workers don't work. People who are not well do not work as well, or they're significantly less productive. And in only 41% of people in the U.S. with a mental disorder receive professional help in a given year. Only 41%. So the amount of time that people are actually going out there to seek treatment is that the number is very low. Now, with people with depression, half the people who seek help for depression wait 8 years or more. And it is harder, the longer the delay, the more difficult recovery is, because you're not doing anything, and it typically gets worse and worse and worse. People with mental health problems also are more likely to seek help if someone close to them suggests it. But what we see from that information is that in the workplace, again, a time where you spend probably most of your waking hours, unfortunately, or a lot of them, and it's also, again, your primary conduit for healthcare, and a lot of healthcare information comes through the workplace. Probably most of it, if not all of it, comes through that. People don't get help. They're afraid to talk about it. So that's really disturbing, and I think a very, very big problem. Now, there's some things we identified about making your workplace safe. And when I talk about that, I really mean trying to make your workplace safer to have discussions about mental health issues. And that doesn't mean it's safe to you necessarily have to be this person where it's like, I'm going to go up, I've got this thing going on, I'm going to tell everybody. It's your business. You don't have to tell anybody if you don't want to. And I've heard people very well-meaning people I've done talks with and things like that who've talked about mental health stuff, and they've said, I think you should never talk to anybody about mental health issues because I'm afraid that you're going to have, in your workplace, you shouldn't bring it up. It's not their business. I can understand why they say that because they had bad experiences. But we try to identify a few different things that would help try to make that workplace a little bit safer. And the first thing is really to get buy-in from C-levels. Sorry, as I get older, I keep using dumb terms like C-level of synergy and crap like that. I've been saying actionable information a lot lately. It's really upsetting. In hierarchical organizations, and most social groups really, because they tend to have some sort of hierarchy to them with human beings, values come from the top down. So the things that are valued by the people at the top of that hierarchy are going to become the values of that organization, period. It is very difficult to get values to come from the bottom up. That's why it is so important. And the number one most important thing to do is if you want to change the way that your organization treats this kind of stuff, if you want to change what they value and what they view as important, and what's okay and what's not okay, You have to get buy-in from top-level folks. That means meeting with executives, sharing research, sharing information on laws, stuff like that, sharing ways to support employees. And those are things like discourage work hour martyrdom. It's a good term, I thought. You should actively discourage people working long hours. You should actively encourage them to take vacations. You should enforce vacation before it's needed. Because if you get to the point where you're like, I really need a vacation, you should have had a vacation already. You have to talk about, they make sure that they have coverage for mental health. There has to be transparency in the hiring process and company practices. This stuff should come up in the interview. And you have to deal with kind of wellness strategies and stuff like that. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're trying to do in that way. But those are the basic outlines for what you try to do when you're trying to talk with folks who are on a C-level, because those are the things they're concerned about. You have to show them research. You have to talk with them about what the legal ramifications are. Because one of the big concerns they're going to run into with anything is what could happen to me legally if I know something or if I make a mistake. This comes up a lot with managers, and so it's important to address those things. Unfortunately, it's also one of the hardest things to do is to get that C-level stuff, but I think it's possible. The second thing I think is really important is to take mental health first aid, and I really strongly feel that you have to get all your execs, all your managers and HR people, in this order: execs, managers, HR people, and then employees. I've taken mental health first aid. It's a day-long class in the U.S. It took 8 hours. Sometimes I can split that up. It is really cheap to do. It cost me $50 out of my pocket, and I think it was a little more expensive than it is in some places. Some places you can find a place to do it for free. So it's really cheap, and honestly, I think you use it way more than traditional first aid, which is also useful. It is helpful to know how to, say, revive a person and compress their chest and things like that, but you're going to use this way more. And it really at the end of the day, it teaches you how to interact with somebody who is dealing with, it may be a crisis, it may be not, but it helps you evaluate if they're in a crisis situation and helps you then interact with them in an effective way. Not to solve their problem for them, but to help assist them in getting help. And it teaches you how to do that in an effective way. So I really, really advocate it. I feel strongly about it. I think it's a really, really good course that everybody should take. I think it's really important to know your local resources. It's important for organizations to research community resources. There is not a Yelp for mental health services in the United States. It is, you got to go to the people who have boots on the ground in your community and figure out what it is, because there is not some national registry for every place that has group discussion therapy and, can help people who with get treatment, and who does sliding scale stuff and therapy-wise and who doesn't. There is not that information on a national level. There's some stuff like that, but there are way more resources that if you're not plugged into the community sort of network of resources, you have no idea if they exist. So it's really important that your organization research those community resources and compile them all in one place. Make those available to your employees. Knowing your coverage is really, really important. And really, at the end of the day, it's about making mental health coverage transparent. It shouldn't be hidden. It shouldn't be something that's in a 100-page handbook that you hand to somebody and then never talk about again. It's important that the company actively disclose the benefits plan, give that information, and then give an opportunity for everybody to meet with an insurance rep and get their questions answered about stuff in a non-judgmental environment, either one-on-one or in a group session or what have you. But it's very, very important at the end of the day to be very transparent about what's available in terms of insurance coverage and things like that. And the fifth thing, and this is the largest thing, really, is actively engaging and educating. And there's really three aspects to this. There's awareness, which is really people coming in, kind of like me at the beginning of this talk, and talking about some of the stuff that I've dealt with. And this talk was primarily an awareness talk at first, and has kind of evolved to some extent to have more information in it. But there's a MHPrompt, mentalhealthprompt.org. MHPrompt is a group that I've worked with that gets folks who are familiar specifically with the tech and developer communities to come and speak at conferences, to speak at businesses, and things like that. A big part of your awareness, a big way to do that awareness, is have somebody come in and talk about it. Somebody who's willing to. Not everybody has to be as, out there like I am about this stuff, but not everybody has to do that. But it is really helpful to have somebody who comes up and is willing to talk about it, because I think it makes everybody feel a little bit better about it. I feel a little less alone. I feel a little less isolated. There's a resources portion of that, which includes things like local resources, where we talked about knowing what those resources are and being able to provide them in an easy one place. Finding online stuff, finding tools and things like that. There's a bevy of, if you have iOS, I haven't looked at Android. On iOS, there's a bevy of tools for dealing with different kinds of common mental health issues, anxiety disorders, and things like that, for tracking kinds of things, for doing breathing or examining behavior patterns and things like that. Some of those things are good, some of those things, maybe they're not so good, but you try to evaluate what those things are and make sure that people know about them. And then promotion of wellness is that kind of stuff. If you ever worked at a larger company and they send around stuff where it's like, hey, we're going to all jog, right? Don't forget to take the stairs and eat fiber. Well, it's the same kind of crap. It's about mental health stuff. It's the same kind of stuff, though, really. It's getting people to start thinking about these things and talking about it openly, where you're doing education, maybe in a public forum. You're talking about, well, these are things I'm dealing with. Like if you have anxiety disorders, there's some patterns and some treatments that are really effective for helping people either cope or dramatically reducing or eliminating the symptoms that they have. Being able to teach techniques and best practices, talking about breathing exercises or doing yoga or things, all sorts of things that have proven to be effective for some people. Support groups are a big one. If you have a large enough group, you're probably going to be able. You would probably be able to put together a support group where you talk about these are people with substance abuse disorders, these are folks with attention issues, these are folks with anxiety disorders, these are people who deal with depression or things like that. And if the support groups can't do them internally, you probably can find things, especially in a larger area, metro area like this, you can find those things in local groups. And really to promote proactive practices that often help with mental health issues. They don't help with all of them, but they help with a lot of the common ones, which are to do things like getting outside and exercising a little and things like that. I'm not going to tell you, there are going to be some people who are like, one time I saw somebody who was like, I want to talk about mental health issues, and the key is to drink more water. And that's okay, I'm glad it worked for you. That's awesome. I actually find I do feel better when I drink water. That's why I drink it all the time. Also, I take medication that makes me really thirsty. But, I do feel better with that. It doesn't mean it's a panacea for everybody to solve all their problems. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's what they call cure advocacy. A key thing, if this ever comes up to you, and it's a little bit slightly off topic for what I'm saying here, is that if you are in a position where somebody's talking about something that they're dealing with, do not try to tell them how to fix it, because you are not qualified to do that. Does anybody here have a master's or PhD in psychiatry or has a medical doctor in psychiatry? Anybody here? Okay, you should not give advice on how to solve people's problems in psychological issues. You can maybe tell them how to, fix that problem in their JavaScript code. That's go to town, brother. But you're not qualified to do that. And you can do a lot of harm, because if they try it and it doesn't work, that is often incredibly discouraging. So you really want to be careful about what you say and what you do and how you say it. You want to be encouraging, but take that mental health first aid. It tells you exactly how to do this stuff, and it's really helpful. So, we've been doing a fundraiser this year. Open sourcing mental illness is kind of the general term for this thing I've been doing for a couple of years. And in 2015, we had to do some fundraising again because some corporate policies changed, and the Prompt campaign was had to look again for support, and they had been helping me go out to conferences and paying for travel and stuff like that. Some conferences do cover those kinds of things, and I don't need it's great, but some of them don't. And so I needed to do fundraising again to pay for travel to go to a place like this, because it ended up costing me about $1,500, right? And it's kind of hard sometimes to get that scratched together. So I had a goal of $5,000 that would probably get me to 2 or 3 of these. So that was, my goal was $5,000. And we reached that goal, that timed goal. We reached that in 2 hours. And that was humbling and super awesome. And we just finished we actually ended up doing a second campaign for, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Cake PHP framework, but they had a conference. I did a second smaller campaign just for them. But both of these were on Indiegogo. So if we add that all up, total raise, and that just ended about just a few days ago, the total raise was $13,600. Which is scary. It is scary when people are like, sure, just take it. What am I supposed to do with it? But we do actually have some ideas. With this extra money, one of the big things we're going to do is create some of that actionable information to basically develop documentation for making tech workplaces safer for folks with mental health issues. And to those 5 things we talked about, what we're going to do is we're going to flesh that stuff out. And I can actually pay for people who are actually trained in this and who have actually done this kind of work in organizational psychology and psychiatry backgrounds and things like that. And so we can do that, and that's really awesome. I'm really excited about it. So what I really need is I need your help to keep talking about this and keep sharing this and learning about this stuff and talk and email and tweet and post. Do it now or keep listening to me and do it in a minute. But if anything I've shown here, if these URLs or messages or words have been useful, if you want to look at slides, resources, and videos, and I try to videotape all of my talks, they're at thisfunkatron.com/OSMI. Did I spell that right? I do that. I often say OMSI every time, to the point where I actually had to set up a redirect to correct that in my web server, because I mistype it so much. And then if you want donations, there's actually the campaign, the primary campaign has ended, but Indiegogo has this thing now where you can do ongoing donations to a thing. So that JMP link will get you to it, OSMI 2015, if you want to throw some cash at that and get a t-shirt or something like that. Anyway, I want to say thank you to a couple people, Camille Wilson, Joanna Wu. Jerry Cody designed the logo. She is a really, really awesome designer. And she took a cut rate to help me out with this, and that was really, really cool. So she designed the logo that we're using for this, which is super awesome. And Jennifer Cooley, she works at Keen.io, and she is going to be helping me with developing a lot of these materials, and hopefully with maybe a couple other people. And there's so many other people. We have 130 contributors. And one of these days I'm going to get a whole list of a big wall of text with all of them on here. So I want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for having me here. Again, there's links to where you can get the talks and videos, or if you want to give money, you can. But you don't have to give money, just talk about it. That'd be really awesome. So that's basically the spiel. That's what I got for you today. So thank you. I appreciate that. We got a little bit of time for questions. If anybody had something they wanted to bring up, or you can also talk to me privately after. That's totally cool. But if you had something you want to bring up now, that's totally fine. So does anybody have a question? Surely someone. Hey, yeah, sure, go ahead.
It's not a question, but it's a comment.
Comment, sure.
So while I'm not a big fan, so just not a fan of Psychology Today's articles, and look at all.
Sure.
They have a surprisingly good therapist search, ridiculously good, and you can filter by insurance, by the population served, or multiple population served, by what type of therapy they practice, by their gender, so on and so forth. Their psychiatrist search is really crappy.
Yeah.
It's more like they should rename their psychiatrist search psychiatrist search, but their therapist search is actually incredibly good.
That's great.
Incredibly good.
That's really great. It's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Could you repeat what he had said with the microphones, that when it goes on the internet with the recording?
Yes. So I will paraphrase and hope I get it right. That Psychology Today's website has a really good psychologist search engine, and you can filter by a bunch of different criteria, including gender and what kind of communities they serve, social groups they serve, things like that. Presumably what they tend to focus on in terms of their therapy. Last time I looked for a therapist, I specifically sought out somebody who does cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. No, not that one. That joke goes over way better here than other places. But But yeah, and because that's really effective for doing anxiety disorders, so you can find people who deal specifically with certain things. So that's great, a great tip. Yep, you had a.
Do you think that there's particular requirements for people that are treating developers? I mean, one of the things that I've noticed that basically being a software engineer is a creative profession, and the side effects of a lot of medications on your creativity as well as your productivity can be really difficult.
Yeah, so that can vary a lot. And one thing I'll say is that my personal experience has been that the medications I take have not affected I don't feel they affected my creativity particularly. However, the way people interact with medication is different for everybody. So, and it may be, particularly with things that treat certain kinds of stuff, I've definitely heard with that, especially with folks who are dealing with things like schizophrenia or things of that nature. Some of the drugs that deal with that stuff, it really does affect how sort of your thought processes work. I personally haven't had that experience, and I just want to say that I wouldn't want to dissuade people from feeling like they should explore medication. However, the short answer is that we don't know. And the reason why we don't know is there is, as far as I can tell, almost no research that is specific to, let's say, the programmer community, or if there's a wider thing, the developer community, which can kind of include people, well, kind of DevOps, and then you also have front-end engineers and maybe designers too, UX people. And at first, that's a lot of different kinds of people, so how do you define that? But then also, basically, there's been no research. There's no research specific to this group of people. And I do think it's interesting because anecdotally, I think that, but this is anecdotal, and you should call bullshit on anybody who ever tries to make any conclusions on it. Anecdotally, I would suspect that certain kinds of mental health issues are more prevalent because these kinds of careers tend to attract certain kinds of personality types and certain kinds of people who are comfortable in doing X, Y, or Z. I know that some of the things that I deal with happen to be also helpful in the job that I do. I'm really good at identifying things like potential security issues that might come up in a web application because I think 3 steps ahead really quickly. And I've found that for some reason I'm able to do that more quickly, and I'm able to make connections faster than some people. Now, I'm not really a very good programmer. Not really. Don't ask me what a monad is. But the point is that I'm pretty good at solving some problems. I'm pretty good at making those connections quickly. And that is because of the way that my brain works. And it is how my thought processes work and how they quickly do that stuff. But that is also the same reason that I have problems that I do. Those two things are directly related.
I wanted to say too, it's only obvious that there would be a higher level of mental health challenges for developers because we do completely mental work. Like one of the things I'm pushing is that if you have a sports team, then you have coaches, you have physical therapists, and you watch out for your athletes, and you can assume that they're going to get injured. Mm-hmm. We don't have something like that, although we work as mental athletes. Professionally, we're going in and doing nothing but thought work.
Yes, that's true.
But we don't have the support of any kind of medical support for our mental processes. But you can assume that it would take a tax.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. It's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah.
On that topic of support, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on sort of the nature and role and potential balance. And I know this is very hazy, but of what is reasonable accommodation for various kinds of mental health conditions. It's a really hard thing, I think, for everyone to bring up and deploy because it feels like that's much treatment for various other things.
Yeah, it's tough. I think that there's no hard and fast rules about it. You kind of have to treat each case separately. I think the key thing is that you get people trying to be empathetic, get people trying to be respectful, and work with folks to try to get them in a place where they can be productive. Now, I have had conversations, strangely when you talk about this stuff like I do, people start coming up to you and thinking you're an expert and asking you questions about, well, we've got this thing going on, and so we've had to have conversations about, those kinds of things. And specific stuff like, this person is having, it's not like, boy, they're having some days where they're not really productive, but like, boy, they checked out for 2 weeks and nobody knew where they were. Things like that. And you're kind of like, I can try to accommodate that, but if it continues, you cannot. dramatically negatively impacts the entire group and the point of the organization, I would think, unless it's just a volunteer group. And then, even then, that's going to be a problem too, because it's like, well, you said you were going to do stuff, now you're not here. So, I think the accommodations, you have to, oh gosh. I quote Spock and say, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I think that you have to balance that stuff. And you have to treat everybody with respect. But there's going to be times where you have to say, look, what you need is, you really need to go and figure this out. And I'm going to help you as much as I can to point you in the right direction to get the help you need. But, one, you can't make anybody do anything. And that's probably one of the most difficult things to deal with when you're dealing with somebody who has issues and they don't want to work on them. And it is really hard and really frustrating. You try your best not to give up on it, especially, if you're close with them, if they're a close friend or things like that, or the family. Sometimes it might take years and stuff, but, if they can't do their job, they can't do their job. And there's some extent where you want to give people a chance to kind of correct stuff and get going in the right direction. But I also think that, I don't know. I guess my feeling is like, well, if they had to check out for 6 months or something like that, that's going to be a big hit for everybody, and going to potentially impact the livelihood of everybody on this team. And that's one of the tough things about running a business or being a supervisor is you have to think about everybody, not just one person. So it's a tough thing. You try to get them the help you can. But there's no. I think the best thing you can do is try to work with them and do reasonable things, reasonably accommodate what they're doing, and get them to be productive again. I think that at some point it's tough, and you have to, if it goes, and probably you're going to get most people going back in the right direction if you do the right things and get them some help. But there's going to be some people where they need more help and they need more time, and they just need to figure that out. Are we almost done?
Yes, good.
Okay. I'll take one more question. In defiance of that, we're done. You.
All right. I also have general anxiety disorder.
Yeah,
And I suffered with it for literally years.
Yeah.
Because I was convinced that I was going to hack my illness.
Mm.
So how do you,
I know a lot of people do that.
yeah. So how do you reach people in a culture like ours that's like very much do-it-yourself type of thing?
Okay, that's a great thing, because they deal with I see that all the time. It says like, I'm going to make my own beer, and I'm going to raise my own chickens, and I'm going to they kind of want to do everything themselves, and they think that they can just figure it out, and they maybe write a program that helps them with it or something like that. And okay, so there's a couple things. Well, they do that. Have you ever run into folks? Sorry, dudes. I meant that in a general way. You run into folks who deal with that stuff, and they're dealing with like exercise. Boy, people can be so pushy about that stuff. It is. Now, here's the thing. You think exercise is bad? We do not understand why people have these conditions. I feel confidently in the research that I've done over many years is that we do not have a good understanding of the complexity of why people have the kinds of issues that they do with what we define as mental health disorders. If we had a really good idea with it, well, we think we have a decent idea of how chemical processes work in the brain with serotonin and stuff like that, and how these transmitters work, so we can take medication that addresses those issues, and you should get help, right? Well, what you end up with people with depression, if you just give them medication that increases levels of certain neurotransmitters in their body, that helps about a third of them, and 2/3 of them it doesn't help. And we don't know why it doesn't help. We don't know, because we don't understand how the brain works, and we don't understand the relationships between how the brain works and how that affects the body, and how the psychology of what's going on with the brain dictates that, and why it works the way it does. We just don't. That's why if you look at like the descriptions of why of different medications that are taken, like stuff I listed off, like Lexapro, Buspar, and things like that, they don't really know why it works. They just know that it seems like it's probably not going to kill you. They say, well, they're making a best guess. It's like, well, we know this chemical looks like this, and we know we can make something that looks like this, and we started giving it some animals and they didn't die, and they seem to get positive results from it. So let's do some more tests and things like that. And they're kind of doing best guesses. They don't have, it's the kind of thing where it's like, we don't have a good understanding of like the guts of like, it's like the difference between understanding how, like, writing, like, say, Python code or Ruby code or some interpreted language like that, and understanding, like, all the way down to the assembly or machine code level of, like, why it works that way. We have an understanding, this is probably a very shitty analogy, but we have an understanding on, like, a high level of, like, well, if I do this, we have these kind of control structures, and we do this, and it works. But we don't really know the stuff about, like, oh, it doesn't do any memory management for it. It does all that stuff for us. We don't understand how all that stuff works. The key thing to get across with folks like that who kind of want to hack their own stuff is that it's not a solved problem. Now, you might be able to figure out some stuff that happens to work for you that helps you, and that is great. But the chances of it working for most other people is slim. So if it makes you happier, if you feel better, and it is not doing bad things to your body that you're going to regret in 5 years or 10 years or something like that, go to fucking town and do whatever you want. That's awesome. But don't tell other people to do it. And, you know, one of the things, this other talk that I give about how to be a great developer, I said, get comfortable with the idea that you're wrong about a great many things. And one of the things that almost everybody is wrong about is how their brains work. We have a very poor understanding of it, even for people who are very thoughtful and try to self-examine. It is very, very difficult to understand why it works that way. And I think that's just one of the things you have to get across. That's why I just say, if you are not trained in this stuff, you shouldn't even try. And the people who are trained just are doing the best they can, but we really just don't know. We don't really know why it works the way it does. So that's why psychology is so important, because we found that to be effective in changing the way that thought patterns work. More effective, or at least often effective, either in conjunction or instead of medication and just chemical treatments, because we don't have an understanding of that underlying stuff. Maybe in 100 years we'll get it. I don't know. And it'll be very different, but right now that's where we are. So it's really difficult, really, really difficult to hack that thing when you don't really know what's going on or why it happens. So that was a very long answer, and I'm sorry about that. I've kept you all very long. Thank you for sticking around. I appreciate it. I'll be here for a little bit. You know, and ask me a question, I'll be up here. So thanks very much. I appreciate it.